Hello and welcome to the Profitable Baker podcast, the show for bakers who mean business. I'm Annie Bennett, founder of the Home Baking Business Academy, and every week I'll be sharing practical lessons, mindset shifts, and inspiring stories from bakers who are building businesses they love. Because success in this industry isn't about who bakes the fanciest cakes, it's about who builds the strongest business foundations. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Profitable Baker podcast with me, Annie Bennett. Now, if you were here with me for the last few episodes, you'll know I spent June talking about sales, confidence, about knowing your worth and being able to say it out loud. Today, we're shifting gears slightly into something that sits right next to that, how you actually show up, your brand, your identity, the thing people see before they ever hear you say a word about your prices. And I want to start with a scenario because I think almost every single one of you listening will recognise it. So you're scrolling. Maybe it's Instagram, maybe it's TikTok, maybe you've gone down a Pinterest rabbit hole at 11 o'clock at night when you should be asleep, and you land on a bake or a brand or a feed that just stops you. The photography is gorgeous, the packaging is considered, the captions sound like an actual person, not a corporate robot. And you feel two things at exactly the same time. The first is genuine admiration. That's brilliant. I want to make things that beautiful. The second is something quieter and a lot less comfortable. A small voice that says, why doesn't mine look like that? Why does mine feel so much more amateur, so much less put together, so much less everything? And it's that second feeling, left unchecked, that sends a lot of bakers down a road I want to talk to you. That sends a lot of bakers down a road I want to talk you out of today. Because that feeling, if you let it sit there too long, doesn't actually lead to inspiration. It leads to imitation. And imitation, however tempting, is one of the quickest ways to lose the thing that was actually going to make your business work. So that's what today is about. How to look at brilliance, properly look at it, learn from it, let it genuinely move you forward without ending up as a less convincing copy of someone else. So let's get into it. Let's talk honestly about why copying happens. Because I don't think it's about laziness and I don't think it's about a lack of creativity. I think it's almost always about fear. When you're building a baking business, especially in the early stages, but honestly, this can creep in at any stage, there's a constant low hum of uncertainty. Will this work? Will people buy this? Am I charging the right amount? Am I positioned the right way? Does my feed look professional enough? And into that uncertainty, along comes someone who appears to have already solved it. Their brand is working. People are commenting, sharing, buying. And it's enormously tempting to think, if I just do what they're doing, I'll get what they're getting. I understand that completely. It's a logical response to feeling unsure. But here's the problem with it, and I want to say this plainly. Copying someone else's brand doesn't borrow their success. It borrows their surface. And the surface was never actually what made it work. What made it work was underneath. A clear sense of who they are, who they're for, and what they want people to feel. The colours, the fonts, the caption style, the packaging, all of that is just the visible output of decisions that happen somewhere you can't see. So when you copy the output without doing the thinking that produced it, you end up with something that looks similar but feels hollow. And customers, even though they can't articulate why, tend to feel that hollowness. It reads as not quite genuine, even when every individual element looks lovely. So if copying is the wrong move, what's the right move? Because I'm absolutely not telling you to stop looking at brands you admire. Quite the opposite. I want you to look at them more, not less. I just want you to learn how to look properly. This is something I talk a lot about inside the Academy membership, and it's really the foundation of the identity work a lot of you have already done. The professional identity statement, the decision filter, all of that. Because that work doesn't just protect you from underpricing or over accommodating, it also protects you from losing yourself the moment someone else's brand catches your eye. And here's the shift I want you to make. When you see something that stops you in your scroll, instead of asking, how do I make mine look like that? Ask, why does this work? And what's the principle underneath it that I could apply in my own way? That one change in the question changes everything about what you take from it. Let me give you an example. Say you see a baker whose packaging feels really premium. Simple craft boxes, one colour of ribbon, a single sticker with their logo, nothing fussy. If your question is, how do I copy this? You go and buy the same boxes, the same colour ribbon, maybe even a very similar logo placement. And now you look like a slightly blurrier version of them. But if your question is, why does this work? You start noticing something different. You notice that the principle isn't craft boxes specially, it's restraint, one colour, one focal point, nothing competing for attention. That's the actual lesson. And restraint is something you can apply with your own colours, your own materials, your own logo, in a way that still looks entirely like you, but borrows the underlying decision that made theirs feel considered rather than chaotic. Same lesson, completely different outcome, because you looked for the principle instead of the picture. Let me give you a few more of these because I think it helps to see the pattern repeated. Say you admire a brand's captions. They sound warm, a bit cheeky, very in on the joke with their audience. The copying response is to start writing in their exact tone, maybe even borrowing their turns of phrase. The learning response is to ask, what are they actually doing here? And usually what you'll find is that they're writing the way they genuinely talk to a friend, rather than the way they think a business is supposed to sound. That's the principle. Write like a person, not like a brand guideline. You can do that and sound nothing like them because the version of talking like yourself is going to come out completely differently depending on who you actually are. Or say you admire a baker's photography, beautifully lit, a particular moody, soft quality to the images. Copying means trying to recreate their exact lighting setup and hoping for the best. Learning means noticing that the principle is consistency. They shoot everything in a similar light or at a similar time of day with a similar backdrop, so their whole feed feels like one coherent world rather than a scattered collection of one-off photos. You can apply consistency with completely different light, completely different mood, and get a completely different but equally coherent result. In every one of these examples, the surface detail is almost irrelevant. What you're actually borrowing is a decision-making principle. Restraint, authenticity of voice, consistency. Those principles aren't owned by anyone. They're available to all of us. What's not available to you, what will never actually fit, is someone else's specific execution of those principles, because that execution was built around who they are, not who you are. This is actually a big part of why we're doing something a bit different in the Academy membership next month, and I want to give you a proper preview of it now because it connects directly to everything we're talking about today. In July, we're doing something I'm genuinely excited about, a brand walk in Brighton, a real in-person session where we go and look, not at baking business specifically, but at shop fronts, packaging, signages, the way different businesses present themselves in the real world, away from the curated, filtered version you get on a phone screen. And the point of that day is exactly what we've been talking about. We're not going to stand outside a beautiful little stationery shop and copy their colour palette into our own businesses. We're going to ask why it works. Why does that signage feel premium rather than cheap? Why does that cafe's till point feel inviting rather than transactional? What's the actual decision behind the choice? And how could each of us in our own completely different businesses borrow that decision rather than that exact look? This Academy Day in Brighton is open to anyone, members of the Academy and non-members, so have a look in the show notes for the link for more details of that. Learning to look properly is a skill. It's not something most of us are taught, and it's genuinely different from the passive scrolling most of us do all day, where we absorb hundreds of images without ever actually interrogating any of them. A brand walk forces you to slow down and ask questions of what you're looking at in person, with other people doing the same thing alongside you, which honestly makes the principle so much easier to spot than scrolling alone ever does. I want to give you something practical you can use right now, because you don't need to wait for a brand walk to start practicing this. Next time something stops you in your scroll, a bake, a brand, a feed, anything, try asking yourself these 3 questions before you do anything else. Question 1. What specifically am I responding to? Not, I love this, but actually naming it. Is it the colour? Is it the simplicity? Is it the way they've written about their product? Get specific, because vague admiration leads to vague copying, and specific observation leads to specific learning. Question 2, why does that specific thing work? What's the underlying decision? Is it restraint, consistency, warmth, confidence? Whatever it might be, this is the bit that takes a little more thought, but it's where the actual value is. And question 3, how would that principle look coming from me? Not from them, from you, with your colours, your voice, your products, your personality. If you can't immediately answer that, sit with it for a day or 2. The answer's usually there, it just needs a bit of space to surface. And if you make a habit of running things through those 3 questions, you'll find that the things you admire start to genuinely make you better, rather than just making you feel like you're behind. And that's the entire difference between inspiration and imitation. Inspiration moves you forward as yourself. Imitation moves you sideways into being a flatter version of someone else. I want to address one more thing before I wrap up, because it's worth saying out loud. Some of you listening to this will be thinking, but what if my version, built from these principles, still isn't as good as theirs? What if I do all this thinking and it still doesn't look as polished? And I'm going to be honest with you, it might not at first. Polish often comes from practice and repetition, not from a single moment of brilliant strategic thinking. But here's what I'd ask you to hold on to instead. A slightly less polished version of you will always outperform in the long run a more polished version of you trying to be someone else. Because customers aren't actually buying polish, they're buying connection, trust, and the sense that there's a real person behind the product. You can only offer that as yourself. You cannot offer that as a copy. So give yourself permission to be inspired loudly and often. Look at brilliant brands, save them, study them, talk about them with other bakers. Just make sure the conversation you're having with yourself afterwards is, what can I learn, not what can I take? If today's episode has got you thinking differently about how you look at the brands and bakers you admire, that's exactly the work we're going deeper into across the Profitable Baker Academy membership in July. We've got training on building a brand presence that's actually yours, on writing product descriptions that sound like you rather than a generic template, and on building content habits that are sustainable rather than something you abandon by the second week. And if you're free to able to join us in person, the Brighton Day on 10th of July is going to be a brilliant hands-on way to practice everything we've talked about today. Looking properly, asking better questions, and coming away with principles you can actually use, rather than a phone full of screenshots you'll never recreate. All of the details are in the show notes, including how to find out more about the Academy membership if you're not already a member. Thank you so much for listening today. If this episode has struck a chord, please send it to another baker who you know is quietly comparing themselves to someone else's highlight reel. They probably need to hear this as much as you did. I'll be back very soon with the next episode. Until then, keep looking and keep building something that's unmistakably yours. Until next time.